I made every mistake you could make, whether it was talking about how you eat versus how you should eat, how you sleep versus how you should sleep. I don't care about your pre-workout concoction. I don't care about your cold plunge if you're not doing the basics of what I consider personal performance stuff first. If you find the right people, not the best people, but if you find the right people and they are really, really, really good at the basics, there's almost nothing they can't do. If you're not dead, you're not done. We can fix a lot of things regardless of how bad somebody else might be telling you things are for you.
All right, welcome to the Doing the Work podcast, where we talk about optimal habits, meaningful community, and self-actualization. This is actually a dream guest of mine to have on the show today. I'll set the scene for the audience a little bit. Way back in the day, in the late 90s, when I was active duty in the Army, I was lucky enough to get assessed and selected into a really cool unit where there was basically you became a part of a 6-man team. You were assigned to an infantry unit that was attached to a military intelligence battalion. And your job was essentially to get inserted about 75 to 150 kilometers behind enemy lines. And you were kind of the eyes and the ears for commanders who might have some questions about what might be going on in enemy territory. And while I was a private, I was in this unit and was kind of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, and I was going through my training pipeline of schools and all that stuff. And during that time, there was this guy. You would kind of he was you'd see him running around and doing his training, and people spoke. He had just come back from this Best Ranger competition and placed really well there. And I remember observing this guy and seeing what his training was like and how he was optimizing his body and his mind. And he was clearly on a mission. And it left a mark on me. It set an example for me as a person in terms of what work ethic looked like, what human performance optimization looked like, what purpose looked like. And even though we didn't have a ton of interactions there because he ended up getting selected and moving on to bigger and better things in the Army. This guest, Alex Racey, left a major mark on me as a person, and I'm just super grateful for you being on the show today.
Wow. Thanks, man, first of all, because I've never been introduced like that. Mentioning Best Ranger, that was 1997, so that kind of gives me like, oh, it must have been right around there that you showed up to our long range surveillance detachment there. And what an amazing unit to luck, as small as that unit is, I feel really, it was a really great place to get a little more experience and everything before I went back towards the special ops side of the house and spent the rest of my career there. But yeah, that was a fun time. Those were really, really good years.
It was such a great time for me as well. I learned a ton. I tell people all the time, I'm a very average guy who just somehow got lucky enough to like walk amongst giants. And I learned, I mean, the amount that I grew and learned as a human being and as a person and as a man in that amount of time that I was in there was just exponential. And so it was a cool time in that, I guess, pre 9/11, right?
Right. Yeah. Pre 9/11.
Yeah.
How old were you when you showed up at LURS?
I was probably about 18, 19 years old.
Oh, wow. So I got a few years on you, obviously, but those were great. That was a great time in my, the pre-war career as an E6. I had a really good time, and I also learned a ton there because we actually supported an active division. The 82nd is, in my estimation, the busiest airborne division. Well, division regardless, but it's the only airborne division and a very busy set of infantry battalions to support as a tiny little LURS detachment. So, the amount of learning you could do there and just operationally growth wise, it was more than double than my previous unit, which was a core level LURS unit. So being a core LURS company guy, you didn't actually support anyone specifically. So you basically kind of had to make everything up all the time training wise. And probably for most people that that are listening who have a military background, that like none of that was an issue because they showed up to a war, whereas I had 10 years of service before the war started.
Yeah, and that was I think I'm fortunate to have a bit of the split. I was still active when 9/11 happened and went off and did, went to combat, afterward, but I was really grateful to have some of that peacetime training that we got, prior to. Like you mentioned, there's nowhere else. Like being in a LRS detachment, especially like where as many JRTC rotations that we would do, supporting all the different people we're training, and how many times are you going to get to be as a private, get to take like, plan your own mission, plan your own routes, plan your own assets, get your RFIs, and get to brief potentially in front of field grade officers, as a PFC or something like that. It's like, it's unheard of, so
Yeah. No,
super cool experience.
I agree. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, then you're actively working against an adversary unit that gets paid to, like, as a LRS guy, their job is to find you, right? So in JRTC especially, you're like, hey, there's actual motivated folks out here looking for us. So it was a great place to grow up.
Yeah. Well, I'm super excited. Like I said, you went on to do, bigger and better things. For 21 years, you spent in units that highly specialized as a commando. I've heard you on a couple other shows and use the term commando, so I'll borrow that term. And but I'm so interested in what you're getting to do now. What I'm curious about is how you've borrowed what you learned from your experience in the Army for over 25 years, and how you're kind of applying that to your chosen career field now. So that's kind of like my very first question is you had all of these, you had so many options of what you could be doing for work right now. You could have gone into, personal security, or you could have gone any direction, but you chose to start a business in life coaching. So I'd love to kind of hear about, that business that you've started now, and why you chose that over everything else.
Yeah, that's a great question, and I guess I should say thanks for having me on here, because obviously it's you sharing your audience with me is a big deal. So I appreciate that. Back to kind of how First Principles Performance got started. So I started a company called First Principles Performance in 2018. Let me back up. So like we were talking about, I left 82nd LRS Detachment in 1999, and I had been selected to go to operator training, the operator training course over at the Special Mission Unit there at Bragg as well. So all of that somehow worked out for me. I joke that they must have lowered the standards there for a short period of time because I snuck in. But the rest of my career was over on kind of that side of Fort Bragg, and obviously after being there a couple of years, the war started. So really, really, perfectly timed career, in my opinion. I had a couple years in the organization, then the war kicked off, and then about 10 years of war back and forth to combat. And then kind of finished out my troop sergeant major time with another group that I was able to lead for a year. And so this is 2013 at this point, and we were basically running the wheels off of everyone going downrange to combat or whatever other mission set we had going on. So internally, we were trying to fix it with just hired help with regard to human performance and mental performance and family support opportunities, all of it. And then our higher headquarters, our highest headquarters, SOCOM, said, hey, we're gonna dump a bunch of money at this problem, because it wasn't just us, it was everybody in the military, but especially in special operations, whether you were what would be considered an operator, or you were a direct support guy or an intel guy, everybody was just getting worn out. So they created a program called Preservation of the Force and Family. And for my organization, the leadership said, hey, we want one guy or gal to focus on getting as much of that POTF support as we possibly can. I was probably the right guy to take that role, and they offered it to me. They said, hey, you want to be the POTF director? And I was like, I have no idea what that is. So after hearing about it, and POTF's 4 buckets was physical, mental, family, and spiritual support. You know, how do we build programs to improve the quality of life of our unit members across SOCOM and their families? And, you know, again, I'm a little, I often talk a little tongue in cheek, and I was like, well, I was a guy who had been married for over 10 years at that point. So I fit the, hey, I could be the, you know, the family support guy because I still had a wife, and I didn't run away from the psychologist, and I was always the gym geek versus, like, you know, the gun lickers that always just rubbed on their guns all day, whether they were at the range or not. I was always the guy who, I loved being on the range, but I loved the physical side of training a lot too. So I was always interested in what was going on in the gym or some of our outdoor training areas or the obstacle course or whatever. And then, you know, I was also not afraid of our chaplains and their office. And, you know, I have a strong faith myself. So I was like, they were like, Alex, go get as much of this money as you can. So I put on khakis and a button-down shirt and started going down to SOCOM as they stood up this POTF headquarters. And I basically just kind of got in the middle of it as much as I could and just started telling everybody who would give me 5 minutes why I needed more trainers, more mental performance coaches, more of everything, more money. And we did really, really well as that program got started, and we really built out an amazing team. And I did that for the last 3 years of my active duty career, and I learned a ton. I learned like a whole nother level of care that I could apply to myself, and not just myself, but everybody I was trying to build programs for. Because you kind of learn much more about mental health when you're the POTF director sitting in 3 days of meetings, focus on mental health and that kind of stuff. So it was really useful to me. And the other thing I would say that kind of set me up for doing what I'm doing now is I made every mistake you could make, whether it was talking about how you eat versus how you should eat, how you sleep versus how you should sleep. Tons, you know, the thing I probably got closest to right over my 25-year career was the movement thing. I was always very interested in being strong for my size and being able to, like, I never wanted to be the guy that was physically the weak link. But even in that, what I call bucket of performance, I made tons of mistakes and let injuries go untreated for way too long before finally I, you know, hobble into our physical therapist and asked for, you know, hey, I need, you know, what would have probably taken 6 weeks to fix turns into a 6 month, like, hey, it's going to take us a long time to fix this because you're so stupid and that you didn't come in 6 months ago kind of stuff, you know, or ignorant is probably the better word. So, you know, making all the mistakes and then being very invested in performance, or so I thought, and then learning a whole new level of performance, kind of how you know, care and feeding of folks in the POTF director job for my last 3 years was huge. And then I'll tease the next part. And then going to a corporate America job, which I did in 2016 when I retired from the Army, and seeing what happens when you're tied to a desk or a computer, basically kind of immobilized because of the requirements of your job and how that affects people. That was the third leg of the stool that caused me to start building what I thought would be a good POTF-like program for civilians.
So the term POTF isn't one that I'm super familiar with, but the Army has now gone to, you know, the holistic health and fitness. So I'm guessing this was kind of like a predecessor to that, where it's got the 5 domains: physical, mental, spiritual, sleep, and nutrition. So it sounds like
Yeah.
you were kind of on the front end of that whole program.
Yeah. For your listeners that don't know as much about the military, so the Special Operations Forces are way smaller in total numbers than the general purpose forces. And a lot of people think special operations means special people. No, it doesn't mean that. It actually means special jobs. Like there's the military at large that has all of these general requirements that all militaries have. And then there's these little niche requirements that they don't need nearly as many people to be able to do those jobs. So those are special operations. So certain people just tend to be maybe drawn to that kind of mission set, and I was, and so again, I went from an organization that, if you look across all the force structures, is probably more than 1 million people, to Special Operations Command, which is only 70,000, or somewhere in that range, and that includes a ton of civilians. So it's much easier for special operations to kind of go, hey, we got a problem in our force. Let's try to figure it out. And one cool thing about how we cross level and cross talk with all of the military, that like all of the Air Force, all of the Army, all of the Marines, Coast Guard, Navy, you name it, is we can figure stuff out at a much lower cost and a much faster rate, and then if we figure out what works, the regular forces can basically then adopt what we're doing or something very similar, and it's just way more efficient for them.
Yeah, I know that they did that with like the Thor 3 program, is basically something they've kind of like stolen from special operations, and are trying to apply that to the broader force now. And I think there's quite a few other examples of that, across the board. I'm super curious though, because like you might be a lot like me because people always ask me, how did you go from being, a Ranger to, when I got out of the active duty Army, I became a social worker, helping people, solve barriers in their lives. And then I moved to being a strength conditioning coach, and then to a gym owner and kind of like business owner. And people are like, wait a second, these seem like crazy leaps from field to field. But the thing that I always kind of geeked out about with my military service and everything else was, I like to use myself as kind of a lab rat, like try new things on myself and study it. And then I really fell in love with the part of like helping other people to like develop themselves and optimize. Like I got like a real high off of that. And I'm curious, is that kind of what drew you to what you're doing now? I mean, like, what is it about those things that you learned towards the tail end of your career that said, yeah, I still want to keep doing that?
Actually, it's I could care less about the people. It's all about making money now. Just money. No, I'm kidding. Obviously, the corporate America. I had a very interesting opportunity initially, to rebuild a program and I was coming out of the military after 25 years, so it was kind of like, hey, can I be like a productive citizen? It was like a huge challenge. What I quickly realized I missed was the community of the military, especially of the organization I spent 17 plus years in. I mean, there were guys that were there when I showed up, and they were at my retirement party as still active members. I mean, one of the cool things about some units, especially when you're enlisted, is if you're able to maintain the standards and do the job, you can literally stay there the rest of your career. So like if you found a place that you loved, of course, it makes sense to do that, right? So I was able to do that. So community is huge for me, and I started missing like that purposeful community thing. And I don't even know if you know this, but I mean, I got deep into CrossFit. I think I went to my first level 1 seminar in Charlotte in 2007. And I mean, it was early enough to where Greg Glassman ran it, Dave, Nicole, everybody was there. I met all the OGs. Then just quickly, CrossFit was always very, very, very supportive of me and anything I wanted to do. I could call up and get in any sold out certification when my timeline lined up. Oh, hey, I want to do Olympic lifting and I can go at this one, but it's sold out. I'd get an email in an hour. Hey, we got you sorted out. Just this is all you need to tell them when you get there. And I could walk into anything. And they have always been so supportive of the military as a whole. So I fell in love with all of that in the mid 2000s, and I think I'm still I haven't gotten my email that I need to recert, but I'm still a level 2 coach, even though I don't coach in a gym. I just really appreciate the knowledge, and it's been, that's another huge organization from a community and growth standpoint that I can point to in my past that kind of had me where I am today as well. But yeah, like I need a purpose driven daily opportunity. And corporate America, even in the executive protection or, people security space, just didn't ultimately do it for me.
I'm like half surprised and half not surprised. You had always been someone who was kind of head of the group in terms of, I'd say like new ways of thinking, new ways of approaching things. But, you always hear people having like CrossFit is somewhat polarizing, so I'm actually really excited to hear that you got into CrossFit, because it's actually something that changed my entire life, my entire way of thinking about physical performance and the approach to it. So I'm kind of curious about like what drew you to it, and what do you feel like you learned the most from your experience while doing CrossFit? And I think you're still doing it to some extent.
Yeah. So funny story. I had broken my finger out on an operation, and so I had that big metal like wrap thing on it for a couple days, and they were like, you're just chill out, you're not doing anything. I picked up a magazine, I think it was a Men's Health. It was the first time I had seen an article about CrossFit, and it was like, hey, if you want a taste of it, go do 15, I think it was, the challenge was 15 minutes, it may have been 12 minutes. And it was like 3 pull-ups, 6 push-ups, 9 air squats. Just repeat that as many times as you can for 12 minutes. It maybe was 15 minutes. The 12 or 15 minutes doesn't matter, because when I read that, I'm like, that's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard of. And then 4 minutes in, completely gassed, I was like, what in the world is going on? What is this voodoo?
Yeah.
And that was kind of, man, it all started right there. You know what I mean? So here we are talking about it 20, well, not quite 20 years later, 17-ish, maybe 18-ish, like from the time I did that first workout. And yeah, I'm just a big fan. And I pretty much for a while, self-taught, so I'm doing everything wrong. We didn't have strength coaches at the time in our gym, so I'm doing squats. My form is horrible. Deadlifts, form's horrible. I'm making huge gains. I went from bench pressing twice a week to bench pressing hardly ever, and my bench went up like 20 pounds one day. I just jumped on it because a buddy was asking me to spot him. I'm like, let me see if I can do that. And I went from like, was never great at bench, 235, and I pushed 255 that day, just completely wondering what the heck's going on. Of course, now I know, and I talk to people all the time about the power of the squat, and I can actually do decent squats now, considering my age and injuries. So just saw amazing improvement. Then went to my first certification and literally was in the middle of the circle every class as the guy doing stuff wrong. Oh, hey, Alex, come on out here. So I'm going to show you what, okay, Alex, go ahead and go through that air squat for us. Okay, notice how he starts with the muted hips. And I'm just like, muted hips? What are you talking about? Needless to say, everything was wrong, and I was still making amazing gains. So I kind of dove in. I worked with Bergner. I worked with Ripito multiple times. Obviously just absorbing and learning as much as I could. And then I could coach people at work on the right way to do a squat and the right way to train as far as resistance training and constantly varied, like CrossFit, but mostly a lot of people would just wanted to know how to do movements properly. So I could teach a proper back squat. I could teach a proper front squat. Even on occasion when guys got good, with very light weight, I could teach a proper overhead squat and all the things that came along with that. And then operationally, I just felt I was already kind of considered a fit guy, but like I just had no issues with anything we did in combat. And I was doing main page workouts for the most part. I did my own running, and we had an amazing opportunity. We had a no course on the compound we were free. It was free for us to use whenever we wanted, as long as we had somebody with us. And I kind of called that my sanctuary, because I'd just go down there and buzz through that thing. And it fit into the CrossFit kind of multimodality types of training very well. But mostly just doing main sites and having no issues with anything I did in training or combat.
And I think that's one of the things that, CrossFit over the years, especially, non-military folks, kind of ended up getting a bit of a bad name because it was kind of like what people did to get hurt. But that definitely that hasn't been my experience. Mostly I found that it taught virtuosity. It forced you to learn a bunch of things that you probably didn't know or have a lot of experience with. So it kind of kept you being like a lifelong constant learner and helped you to be way more well-rounded. And it sounds like that was the kind of an experience that you had too. It's something that kind of kept you being consistent and helped you to learn to do things correctly.
Oh, 100%. Yeah. And I mean, it's kind of like that virtuosity component of, hey, get really good at doing something that people think, oh, if I do this, a couple times, oh, I've got this down. No, actually you don't. And that's a huge concept I call my framework the Better Basics framework, because and we can get into that later, but I just find that if you aren't doing the basics well, I don't care about your pre-workout concoction. I don't care about your cold plunge. I don't care about, grounding if you're not doing the basics of what I consider personal performance stuff first. All that other stuff is great to add on later, but kind of useless to start with.
Yeah. I'm a major proponent of that. I think that people who are elite at anything, and you can name the field, I don't care if they're a poet, I don't care if they're, in the military, I don't care if they're an accountant. The people who are elite really learn how to master the basics. They become extremely uncommonly good at the basics. And I'm curious if you find that to be true, and how you've kind of incorporated that into your the 4 pillars of your training program now.
It's 100% true. If I get an opportunity to talk to any group, whether it's talking about leadership or team building or whatever, I'm like, if you find the right people, not the best people, but if you find the right people and they gel and they are really, really, really good at the basics, there's almost nothing they can't do in that domain where they're looking to achieve virtuosity. And I mean, we do it. There's so many examples across everything in kind of the performance space. From a military standpoint, as a military, high-end military, whatever person doing, you name it, shooting, jumping, explosives work at the highest level, you always come right back to, from a shooting standpoint, somebody just goes and wins a match. What are they doing Monday morning on the range? They're doing 25-meter slow fire drills with a pistol with iron sights. It's like, I'm really good at this level because I spend so much time mastering things at this level. And even in LURS, we could go do some crazy operations even back in the 90s from a training standpoint, like some wazoo stuff, because we had the basics, we had fitness, we had communication, we had movement through the woods. So it was like, okay, well now we're gonna go and we're gonna jump into JRTC and like do a full profile combat training mission with live op4 and be successful because we weren't worried about, working a compass, for lack of a better example, to get to where we needed to put our hide sight in.
Yeah, that actually, this kind of makes me think of something I read in your blog that's super interesting to me. You talk about this term adventure ready, right? And that's something that you kind of like talk to your clients and everything about. And it sounds to me like what we're talking about right now, like kind of like getting the basics down to a high, doing the basics uncommonly well helps you to be ready for all these other things in your life. And I was wondering if you could kind of talk a little bit about that concept a little.
Yeah, sure. And kind of where we've been talking most of the time, people are probably thinking about like these big physical things. So my 4 buckets are eat, sleep, move, think. When I'm talking about getting the basics right on eating, it's, when you eat, what you eat, and how much you eat. And how, so there's some basic principles under those 3 sub paragraphs, if you will, like, why having a shorter food clock helps with gut health and also metabolic flexibility, and even helps you sleep based on that gap at the end, as an example of something. But when I'm talking about my better basics, I'm talking about sleep. So everything else we're kind of talking about, you think about these big adventure ready things. Oh, I did this 24-hour ultra marathon competition. Obviously there's nothing to do with sleep there, but if you weren't sleeping right before that competition, you're not maximizing the basics of proper sleep, i.e. the environment, the pre-bed rituals, and then what I call the clocks, which is your master clock, or how you interact with light throughout the day. I think Brian Johnson, I stole his term and modified it a little bit, or it might be exact, but that electronic sunset, like when you shut down electronics at a certain point of the day before bed. And then the third one is that food clock. Buddy of mine that I also have in my Better Basics course right now, Better Basics program, he was just telling me about he went to a nonprofit event and they had a very late meal. He had this massive steak, no alcohol, no nothing. And just this steak wrecked his sleep because it was much closer to bedtime than when he normally would finish eating. And I mean, we laugh at the Whoop data. I'm like, man, that looks like a 3 margarita night. And he's like, no, it was a 16-ounce bone-in ribeye. I'm like, interesting, So we're not talking about like racing across the country or jumping out of airplanes or anything. We're talking about like the high performance effect of getting good sleep, which in the military, I totally had the Reagan, Thatcher, Trump, I'll sleep when I'm dead kind of mindset for years and years and years. And I've been working on sleep pretty hard, especially thinking about brain health. And, like the one place mentally that I don't want to end up if I make it long enough on this earth is now I'm like, more than anything, I want to make sure my brain, my cognitive ability stays as solid as possible. Well, what's one of the primary ways to guarantee that? It's sleep. So my sleep basics are huge. The third one's movement, and kind of back to that wow moment for me. Moving all day as an infantry guy or a special operations person on the active side of those roles, that's, you didn't even think about it. It's like asking, that common analogy of asking a fish about the water. They're like, what's water? We didn't have to think about moving all day. We were up and down off of the ranges and like there was just constant movement and usually a normal, very robust workout opportunity each day. Fast forward to corporate America and it's like, okay, I made it on time to the CrossFit gym 4 times this week, but day in and day out, I'm very sedentary because I'm tied to this desk. And that wasn't the case initially because I was rebuilding a program and I was the only person in the program. So I got to do all the physical labor components of executive protection. But that quickly changed as I built out the team. And even as a security guy, you get to move around office buildings and traveling, the spaces you're in, traveling and stuff, a lot more than a regular, say, finance person. But it's like, I call it CrossFit sloth, because I talk to people all the time. I'm like, tell me about your workout. Oh man, I work out 6 days a week, 5 CrossFit, and then I play 2 hours of pickup soccer on Saturday. I'm like, what do you do besides those workouts during the week? Tell me about the rest of your day. How much movement is it? It's pretty much all sedentary. And I'm like, let's talk about what you can do every time your Zoom call ends, even if you only have 5 minutes before the next one starts. Like with what, I'm sure you've heard the term, they're calling them exercise snacks now. So, hey, can I do some exercise snacks? Can I just get up and do some Superman stretches at my desk regularly? Can I just get in the bottom of a squat by my desk and hold it, just get nice and comfy in that, that nice bottom of the squat position, even if the form isn't great, just touching those endpoints on movement. And so much of my passion around helping people with what I call personal performance, again, those things that, because of where I worked before and where I was not even really having to pay attention or think about things, where I'm trying to help people now. I think having, in the movement bucket, I think having a good, I call it play and train. Like, I want you to have a good training plan, that maybe is seasonal, because it also includes the sports you love to play as a kid, where you're playing that with your kids, or you're playing pickup. Because I live in Colorado now, and I could probably within an hour be signed up for a volleyball, or like an adult dodgeball group if I wanted to be for the winter, as the leaves are turning and we're getting the indicators that snow will be here soon. So, like, all that's hugely important as a small component of moving all day, in my opinion. And how do you do that if you're in an office environment or whatever? So that's the things that I think about now, and try to help people reset their apertures on what matters, and kind of redesign and redefine how they're thinking about performance.
Yeah, I think performance is a really interesting thing. And I think the problem that, like, you're bumping up against with these, these people in the corporate world, these high achievers in the corporate world, they're so what? Their purpose isn't largely, most of the time, tied to their physical abilities. There's not like a direct link to that. As a guy in special operations, clearly your survival oftentimes, and the survival of your buddies oftentimes, depended on, how physically, mentally, what was your fitness like, and I think that's a tough thing when you're working with civilians, is helping them to realize how much of their purpose and their performance is still tied to their physical fitness. They just don't see it, and I'm wondering if you're finding that. You spent 25 years training warriors, and now you're jumping into the world of training, corporate executives and other folks like that. I'm wondering, are you seeing a major difference in how you're having to train them and how you're approaching the training itself?
I wouldn't say I'm seeing a major difference, because I really wasn't too deeply involved with the actual training as I'm approaching it now when I was in the military. Again, it was like asking a fish how the water was then. It was like, there were always competitions. How fast can you get through the O course? Which are, if we had this one test called the UBRR, and it gave you a score, like a number, 1107 or 958. And so you could just stack up against your buddies and be like, I kicked your ass. It had nothing to do with how well you ate the day before, or if you bothered to even sleep. You know what I mean? So actually, I do interact with some military people now and some retired folks, and they need this same kind of, hey, give me a simple to follow starting point plan that I can start feeling more energy, and I can start improving my body composition, and I can start thinking more clearly. And I mean, all these metrics now, they're kind of the same, but it's just like the way I describe it. I wrote a piece, gosh, it's a blog probably from more than 3 years ago, but defining high performance. And I found a picture of a commando, like all like gunned up, totally kitted out. And I had this lady standing there, and I'm like, who's the higher performer? And of course, anybody that comes from our neck of the woods is going to go, oh, the guy that looks like a Navy SEAL is the high performer. And I'm like, well, not so fast, because this lady, maybe she's a corporate real estate executive, and based on the requirements of a corporate real estate executive, she's crushing life. She's able to do everything she needs to do at work. She has an amazing family life because she comes home with plenty of energy and plenty of cognitive capacity left in her day. And, her relationships are amazing. She's amazing from a family standpoint. She's amazing at her job. And the Navy SEAL might look, or the guy, the commando all dressed up in his kit, like he might look really cool in that picture, but, he's not sleeping. He eats like crap. He's a rage machine, but he looks really good in that uniform. So in my goal with that blog was high performance is personal. And that's 100% how I look like it now, or how I look at it now. And that's one of the first documents I send my clients. I'm like, hey, don't concern yourself with what I used to do and think that's high performance. That's crap. I'm just like my clients now. I'm in my basement office right now. I have to plan and prioritize movement just the way I just described it to you. I have to plan and prioritize sleep. I have to plan and prioritize eating in a way that I have good energy, and I'm like able to maintain the body composition that I feel really good. When I left LURS and made it through selection, this is how goofy some things happen in your mind. You're like, well, man, if I'm going there, I'm going to get on creatine. I need to be 10 pounds heavier. And, I started talking to some of my new cadre when I got there, and they're like, what are you talking about? Look around. You're not the biggest guy here, but you're not the smallest guy here. Like, you're fighting weight. And so I kind of was like, I guess that was kind of stupid of me to get those medium BDUs. I'll go turn them back in and get my smalls. And to think that I was going to gain 10 pounds of muscle, it was just like some of the ridiculous things that happen in young men's brains in their 20s, So yeah, my fighting weight has pretty much been 165 pounds. The only time I really got bigger than that was, you'll like this story. So I went to Ranger School in 1993. The day I finished the Florida stress phase, I just happened to weigh in before the dog X started. I weighed 132 pounds. 3 weeks later to the day, I weighed 182 pounds. I gained 50 pounds in 3 weeks. And I was just had fat hanging off of me. Yeah, but I was 23, so it took a few months, and got back into training we were prepping for this thing called the Cambrian Patrol over in Wales, and that train up just caused my metabolism and everything to be like, oh, we're back to kind of how we used to operate, and everything came back online. And I waffled off so much there. I don't even know where we started, but hopefully I answered your question if there was
no,
one.
Yeah, it definitely answered the question. And like, I love where you're going with it, because you're 100% right. Like, one of the tenets of this show, and like who I think I am for people, is helping them to find optimal habits, right? And optimal is individual, and those habits that you do might even be different, so what you have to find first is, how do I, what's my purpose? What is it that I want to become elite at? And then you can reverse engineer, what do these habits look like? There's the basics that everybody needs to do, you've already talked about, but there might be some, to what extent you do each of those basics, and some other habits and things that you might add in are going to vary, depending on the person. And I think you touched on that beautifully, kind of comparing and contrasting what someone who in special operations might do compared to somebody who, like you mentioned, is a corporate real estate agent. So Um,
Yeah.
I am curious about, so another thing that's huge for me is you know, mental fitness, you know, have a strong sense of resilience and, you know, mental toughness, because that's ultimately what's going to help us to do you know, to do the work every day, to do our training, to show up for our families, to do our job to a high level is mostly mental. And I'm not sure if this is true, so I want to ask you first. I think you started your military career in Second Ranger Battalion. Is that right?
Yeah. Yep. Massive,
And
massive career at Second Ranger Battalion.
yeah, could you tell me a little bit about that? Because if the story's true, I have a question about it.
Okay, yeah. So yes, I joined the military on a Ranger specific contract. I had ran into a an amazing dude in college, and he had just left Third Ranger Battalion. His name was Randy from my hometown, and like when I finally I was thinking I might try to be a pilot, and then I was looking at Army aviation, but I met this guy, and my dad had been a paratrooper, my brother had been a paratrooper. I was like, well, maybe I'll go, you know, roll around in the mud and eat snakes for a little while, and then I'll go be a pilot after I get that out of my system. And then Randy kind of opened up my eyes about Ranger Regiment, because this is 1990. This is 1990 and 91, so there was no internets to just let me Google that. So I was gung ho on getting my black beret, and I get to basic. I'm all like, I got a Ranger contract, and then the Ranger L&O shows up a couple weeks in, and these guys who got $5,000 to sign up for infantry, and I only signed up for like 20. I think there was this 28-month opportunity back then. These guys, so they got a chunk of money, and all they had to do is extend your contract for a year, and you can come to RIP too. I was like, totally messed that up. So anyway, basic training, AIT, jump school, Ranger indoctrination program. All of our RIP instructors had just rotated in. They were all combat vets from Panama, just full of piss and vinegar. And so we had a lot of fun with regard to our RIP experience and getting the smoke. And I was successful, and I went out to Second Ranger Battalion. And about 4 months later, I had an accidental discharge on a range back down at Benning. We were down there for a big multi-battalion training event, and then we were going to stay and celebrate the 50th anniversary of the Ranger Regiment. I had an AD on a 2nd Battalion level range right in front of an E5 that came up after I finished firing, and was like, "Did you mean for that one round to go off and hit the 50-meter berm?" And I, of course, was like, "Yeah, honesty is the best policy." And I said, "Negative, Sergeant." And he grabbed my M16, and just, it became a battalion level event within like minutes, and I got released for standards. So,
Yeah.
of course, as a 21-year-old, I was just like, well, my life's over. I'll finish my 4-year degree, or I'll finish my 4-year commitment, and I guess I'll just go back to college, and the Army will pay for it. And fast forward 4 more months, I'm like, holy cow, this place is amazing. We called it the Ranger Retirement Home, because all the kids who did something stupid like me, and I say stupid because my accidental discharge was up and down range. I mean, I literally shot a berm that had a target above it because I was trying to change a magazine because I kept having double feeds. Anyway, I didn't follow the proper procedure for that mag change, and I did have an accidental discharge, albeit a safe one. So I did deserve to be kicked out. I got kicked out. I thought my military career was over, and within a few months at LURS, I'm out leading. I'm literally leading 2 and 3 man patrols. I'm winning a competition to get a Ranger School slot. I'm doing some of these things that actually ended up allowing me to go to these international patrolling competitions as a literally a baby in the Army. And it ended up not being the end of my career, obviously, because I stayed for 25 total. But yeah, it made for being like a recruiter for the unit. I would go back to 2nd Ranger Battalion as an E7 or E8 and talk to people that we were trying to recruit for the unit, and I would tell them that story, and their heads would just explode. It was a really, really powerful,
Well,
like,
it's
hey,
powerful
don't
for
count
me
yourself out
to,
story.
yeah. I that's what I would, so that's the story I had heard, and I wasn't sure if it was true or not, but it is mind blowing to me, to just the mental, when we talk about resilience, the ability to take something that I know you had worked so hard for, and something happens, right, and it's a major setback, and a lot of people would have, like you said, I'm going to do my 4 years, I'm going to get out. I guess this wasn't in the cards for me. But how the story actually played out is that you went on to the most elite levels of military, as an infantryman. You went on to the most elite levels,
Yeah.
and did it for a very long time. And it's inspiring to hear that story.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if you can remember back, like, was there a turning, you had already said, hey, this is over for me, what, like, it was just getting into another unit, or like, what do you think was the catalyst for, you turning it around and turning it into a success?
I think one, just being a goofy kid. I mean, yeah, I was 21, but at the same time, 21 in 1992, because it was 1992 at this point. I joined the military. I started basic in October of 91. So by the time I got to 2nd Battalion, it was, I believe, the end of March of 1992, and I got kicked out either at the end of June or early July. I think, you have this like vision of what right looks like, and um, and then it gets literally like basically vaporized, and you're like, well, that's that. No recovering from that. But then you get to the next organization, and there's like I Corps LURS. We didn't have a division, like an infantry division, that we supported directly. So we did, like I mentioned, it wasn't as good training wise as the 82nd LURS detachment experience. But what I Corps LURS had was amazing NCOs. I mean, some of the most like probably pivotal things I learned, or pivotal individuals that I learned from, was at I Corps LURS. I got there as an E2. I left there as a E5 promotable, and guys like Chris Schott, that I wasn't on his team, but I was like, he was an RRD guy. Like, I've heard my RRD peers, like guys my age on other podcasts, talk about when they went through their assessment for our Ranger Reconnaissance Detachment, which is what it was called back in the day. And they met this guy named Schott that was just amazing. Well, I worked with that guy at I Corps LURS for years. And I just kind of had this like, oh, maybe my career isn't over. And then it's time to re-enlist or get out. And I'm like, well, I could re-enlist to stay here. And within a year, like based on what I'm seeing, I'll end up getting orders to Korea. Or I think I would have gotten a school or two out of it though too. But I re-enlisted to go to Fort Bragg from Fort Lewis in Washington. And we worked for an MI brigade there, and they were like, you want to go to Fort Bragg, North Carolina? They're like, what are you on about? I'm like, well, everything I want to do would require a move there eventually if I'm successful in the selections I want to go to. So why don't I just go ahead and go there and get that out of the way, was kind of my thought process. So I re-enlisted and went to Bragg after the end of my first 4-year commitment. But I was still a young guy. So I before I signed in, kind of like you were talking about, I walked into 82nd LURS detachment and said, hey, this is who I am. One of my E7s should have called and mentioned I was going to pop in, and they basically they basically held my hand through the whole in-processing process. Like, they were with me when I signed into the 82nd. Like, the right guy to be there going, hey, this guy, this is where this is where he needs to be assigned. And that worked out too. So,
Yeah.
all of these things after like what I would, at the time call the biggest failure of my life, all of these things lined up and just like dominoes, just click, 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 just fell right into place. And I had an amazing, other than getting kicked out of the Rangers as a private, I had an amazing time all 25 years. It was just such a great time.
Yeah, I can only imagine some of the experiences and lessons that you've learned throughout, all these incredibly special things and places that you've been. So, but as we, I could talk to you about these stories all day, but I know that time is limited. I'd love to, as we kind of wrap it up, I'd love for you to kind of tell us a little bit about how people can find you. What kind of people do you work with? I'd love to kind of just promote you and your business a little bit as we bring it to a close.
Yeah. So my website is fpp.llc. So FPP as in First Principles Performance, and it's I stood it up as an LLC, and I was able to get that domain. So it's just www.fpp.llc. If you snoop around on there, within a few seconds, it's going to say, "Hey, you want to reach out to Alex?" You can choose to get a hold of me that way. One of my minions will respond to you. That's another joke. I'm a one-man band at this point. So the other thing you could do is you could just email me at Alex, ALEX, at Foxtrot Papa dot Lima Charlie Charlie. I'm also a little bit active on LinkedIn. Again, my name, Alex Racey, you'll find me. There might be a female that is she does tours, like she sets up tours. I'm not that Alex Racey. I'm the personal performance coach that you'll be able to find on there too. That looks like this, and probably has a picture of a big mountain expanse behind me. But and I'm on Instagram, and I think that's First Principles Performance Coaching, or at First Principles Performance Coaching. But I haven't been active on there. I need to get active on there, probably based on what I'm trying to do. But I coach one-on-one. Most of my one-on-one clients are men who have been very successful in the wealth department, but they left their health back the road 20 or 30 years, and now they're like, ooh, I need to fix this. So I come alongside them, and we do a lot of deep work, and that's expensive, and it's ask for a 1-year commitment. So if anybody listening is like, oh, that's me, just get a hold of me. I will assure you, if you're not dead, you're not done. We can fix a lot of things regardless of how bad somebody else might be telling you things are for you. It just requires kind of reigniting with some good basics and then going from there. In addition to that, I've got some very affordable programs that are shorter in duration. And I think the better basics, I think it's the Pareto principle. I think if you get this 20% of stuff I can teach you in 12 sessions right, you'll be 80% ready, adventure ready for whatever your adventure is. Obviously, if you're going to go out and do a 100-miler, there's some very specific training that you would need to do for that ultra marathon distance. But that ultra marathon training is going to go much better if you have what I consider the better basics already operating at a high level. So I have individual one-on-one opportunities for that, and I have about, within the next couple months, I'll be launching my second group program for what I'm calling the Better Basics program, and that is again, it's that same 12-session program, 12 sessions, but doing it in a group format where there's a lot of interaction and discussion, and so you're learning from everybody else's questions and commentary, and obviously because it's a group, it's much more affordable. So those are kind of the three options I have right now. If you make it to my website, there's like 170 plus blogs on there and it's got a little search function towards at the top of the page. So you can put in a topic, and if I was smart enough to put it in the title or the actual article, what you're looking for, you'll get some options for that.
Yeah, I've read through your website and your blog. There's anyone who's listening who's looking to get smarter, to pick up from, you'll get a sense of Alex's intelligence, his background, the type of leadership that you would get through one of his programs. So I definitely encourage you to go there. But if you are a high performer who is looking to improve any aspect of your being, Alex is your guy. So make sure you guys hit him up. Any last parting comments or anything, Alex, before we put this thing to rest?
One thing real quick, I don't think we dove into my fourth bucket, which is think, and that's obviously the mindset stuff that I've found very useful over my military career and continue to find useful in my current situation. A lot of that's on the website. You can snoop around on that. Otherwise, man, again, I really appreciate the opportunity to get in front of your audience. When I started coaching, I think it was the first time I ever came home and sat down with my wife, Carly, and said, I know what I want to be when I grow up. I really, really, really enjoy and feel very positive about helping people improve their performance. So thank you for letting me run my mouth about it for all this time. I appreciate it.
Oh, absolutely. It's an absolute gift to me. So you mentioned Chris Hott. That was someone you looked up to when you were younger. And I often mention your name when I say someone who had set an example for me as a young soldier. And so it's been an absolute gift to have you on the show. And it's so exciting to know that you're out there with all these talents and knowledge that you have, helping other people to fix these problems in their own life. It's just so awesome. So massive amount of gratitude for you, and thanks for being on the show.
Thanks again, brother.
All right, have a good one.